During a brutal survival exercise near Bridgeport, I slipped on an icy slope and thought I was going to die. The wind was so strong I could barely breathe. Then a decorated Marine major fought his way through the storm, lifted me to my feet, and carried me to safety. Later, while we sat catching our breath, I laughed and said, "Whoever marries you will be a lucky woman." He looked at me for a long moment, leaned closer, and quietly replied, "I was hoping it'd be you." That is the version I told a friend over the phone 3 nights later, and every word of it is true. It is also the worst possible way to tell this story, because it makes the whole thing sound like a meet-cute with frostbite. And what actually happened on that mountain took 8 years, 4 lives, and 1 piece of paper to set up. The line he said in that tent was not a line. It was the end of a sentence he had started writing a long time before he ever met me. So let me back up and tell it right. Start with me, because you need to understand exactly how invisible I was when this began. I'm 41 years old. I've been an Army logistics sergeant for 19 years, which means my entire career can be summarized in 1 sentence. I move things to where they are needed. Beans, bullets, batteries, blood, generators, body armor, sleeping bag liners, and once, memorably, 1,100 pounds of frozen turkeys to a forward operating base 2 days before Thanksgiving. Nobody makes movies about us. When a mission goes right, the credit belongs to the people who did the mission. When it goes wrong, somebody pulls the supply records and finds out whose signature is on what. I learned early that in my line of work, a signature is not a formality. It is a confession you write in advance. I have a left knee that was rebuilt after a tactical vehicle met a washed-out road in 2019, 2 surgeries, 1 permanent profile, and a brace I wrap every morning at 04:30 with the resigned efficiency of a woman saddling a horse she doesn't fully trust. I have a divorce that finalized 2 Marches ago. Somewhere near the end of it, my ex-husband told me I used to be lighter. He didn't mean weight, or maybe he did. With him, toward the end, it was always both. And as of last winter, I had a piece of paper in my file directing me to a joint cold weather course run by the Marine Corps in the mountains above Bridgeport, California. The official reason was cross-branch coordination certification. The unofficial reason was that somebody at battalion had looked at my age, my knee, and my waiver and decided I needed what the memo called sustainment validation, which is military for prove you're not done yet. I want to be honest about something. Part of me agreed with the memo. That's the ugly secret of getting older in uniform. The doubt doesn't arrive from outside first. It moves in quietly, somewhere around the 2nd surgery, and starts paying rent. The Marines run their mountain warfare training center off Highway 395, up where the Sierra Nevada stops being scenery and starts being an opinion. The main camp sits around 6,800 feet. The cold up there in January is not weather. It is policy. It gets into rifle actions and radio batteries and the exact center of your back, and it does not negotiate. I arrived on a Sunday with 1 duffel, 1 rucksack, and a knee brace, and I was the oldest trainee in the package by 11 years. The rest were Marines and soldiers in their early 20s, all cartilage and confidence, the kind of young where you bounce. They clocked me in the first 30 seconds the way the young always do. A glance at my face, a glance at the brace, a glance at each other. By day 2, somebody had started a betting pool in the instructor shack. I found it on a whiteboard when I was sent in to sign for radio batteries. Roster numbers down one side, odds down the other, money on which trainee would tap out first. My number had the shortest odds on the board. Somebody had drawn a small tombstone next to it. I want you to know I didn't erase it. I logged it. Time, date, location. In the green memo book, I keep rubber banded in my chest pocket because I write everything down. It's a logistics habit and a woman in uniform habit, and one other thing, which I'll get to. Then I left the tombstone right where it was. I decided I wanted them to have to wipe it off themselves. There was a Marine major running the winter package. You'd have picked him out of the crowd in 2 seconds, and not because he was loud, the opposite. He was the quietest thing in camp. Late 40s, gray coming in at the temples like frost finding a fence line, a face that had spent 20 years being windburned on purpose. He moved the way senior people move when they have nothing left to prove. No wasted steps, and when he spoke, the camp's volume dropped about 10% all on its own. I met him at check-in, across a folding table with a billeting roster on it. I signed my name, and when I looked up, he was watching my hand, not my face, my hand. Watching it the way you watch something you are trying to memorize, or something you have already memorized and are checking against the original. It lasted maybe a second and a half. Then he blinked, said my last name out loud, pronounced correctly on the first attempt, which has happened perhaps 4 times in 19 years, and told me chow was at 17:30 and the weather brief was at 1800. I read it completely wrong, of course. I assumed he was doing the math every cadre member does on a 41-year-old with a knee brace. Liability, schedule risk, medical paperwork. I filed him under polite skeptic and went to find my tent. I want to put a flag here, because this is the first thing I got wrong, and this story is mostly a list of things I got wrong in the correct order. He was not looking at a liability. He was looking at my handwriting. I just didn't know yet that my handwriting was something a person could recognize. The course itself was honest work. Land navigation through snow that came up over the knee. Cold weather casualty drills where you learn that hypothermia makes people argumentative before it makes them quiet. Snow shelters, avalanche awareness, rope work, and at the end of week 1, the capstone everybody talked about in the chow line. A ridge movement at altitude, fixed lines on the icy pitches, full rucks, no excuses. The training cadre were professionals. The trainees were children, but they were good children mostly. The exception was a 26-year-old lieutenant who had been put in charge of our training platoon and who spoke to me exclusively in the tone you use with equipment that has begun to disappoint you. He never said anything I could write up. That generation of condescension is fluent in plausible deniability. He just always seemed faintly surprised when I completed things. Day 4, the camp had a problem, and I am telling you about it because it matters later. A gear shipment came up the mountain short. 14 sleeping bag liners and 9 sets of overboots. Missing, with a storm window 6 days out and a supply sergeant going progressively gray about it in the doorway of the warehouse tent. I overheard exactly enough while signing for batteries. Then I did the thing I have done my entire adult life. I found a field phone and a signal, and I made 3 calls. One to a warehouse in Reno I have dealt with for years. One to a National Guard armory that owed the universe a favor. One to a contracting officer I have known for 15 years who answered the way she always answers, which is, what do you need and how illegal is it? It was not illegal. It took 40 minutes. The liners came up the hill on a returning chow truck 2 days later, and the overboots came with them. And I never mentioned it to anyone because the point of logistics is that nobody ever has to know there was a story. The supply sergeant talked, though. Supply sergeants always talk. I knew the major had heard because of what changed, which was small and specific. He stopped explaining things to me twice. Around camp, instructions for the trainees came in 2 passes, once for the room and once again, slower, for whoever looked lost. After day 4, I got the room version and a nod. In an environment built to remind me of everything my body couldn't do anymore, a man I barely knew had quietly adjusted for the one thing I could, and he kept handing me coffee. That started day 3. The instructors had a stove and real grounds and actual cream, none of the powdered insult from the chow line, and at 0500 he started putting a metal cup in my hand without being asked every morning like it was a standing task on somebody's duty roster. I tested it for poison the first time. Out loud, he said Army trust issues. I said Army experience. He almost smiled, and I rationed that almost smile for the rest of the day, and I am not proud of that, but I had had a long couple of years. Now I have to stop and tell you about 2014 because nothing else in this story makes sense without it. I'm going to tell it the way it lives in my head, which is in the present tense, at 3 in the morning, forever, Kandahar. I'm working the night desk on the battalion watch floor, which is a plywood room that smells like burnt coffee and hand sanitizer, where the war arrives as radio traffic and leaves as paperwork. It is 0314 when the call comes in. A patrol element has been hit outside the wire. An IED initiation, then small arms. 4 casualties. The voice on the radio belongs to a kid who sounds 22 and is working so hard to keep the shake out of his transmission that the shake is all you can hear. He reads the grid twice. He says the corpsman's count. 1 urgent surgical, 3 urgent. The urgent surgical has an arterial bleed below the knee and a tourniquet that went on at 0249. A tourniquet is a clock. Everybody on that floor knows it. You get hours, not many, before saving the leg stops being the conversation and saving everything above the leg starts. The medevac request goes up the proper channel and comes back down it at 0319 with the proper answer, which is no. The dedicated air is grounded at the other field, weather hold, tasked and stacked, no assets available until first light. First light is 0547. The ground route to that grid is 8 hours of bad road that nobody drives at night for the same reasons the patrol got hit on it in daylight. The duty officer says what the channel allows him to say, which is they'll have to hold on. He does not say it coldly. He says it like a man reading his own ulcer out loud. And I am sitting there with a headset on, looking at the flight schedule I maintain, because maintaining it is my job, and on that schedule is a resupply bird. Fueled, on the pad, scheduled for an 0530 parts run, crew racked out in the ready room 40 feet from the rotors. It is not a medical aircraft. It is not my aircraft. I am a logistics sergeant. I do not have tasking authority over so much as a wheelbarrow. Retasking that bird means waking a crew under somebody else's authority, busting the schedule, breaking, by my count then and my count now, 6 separate protocols, and putting my signature on every one of them. And I want to be honest with you about the 10 seconds I sat there because the 10 seconds are the whole story. I thought about my pension. I thought about my record, my careful, boring 19 years in Outland. I thought specifically the words, "This is how careers end." Then I thought about 4 mothers getting 4 phone calls because a helicopter full of spare parts kept its schedule. I called the pilot direct. Warrant officer, 20 years in, voice like gravel settling. I laid it out plain. Grid, casualty count, tourniquet time, weather hold, no assets till 0547. There was a pause about the length of a heartbeat, and then he said the sentence I will be able to recite on my deathbed. I need a tasking authority on the manifest, Sergeant. I don't need it to be the right one. I need it to be a name that won't blink. Then it's mine, I said, and I spelled it for him. While the crew spun up, I did the paperwork, because there is always paperwork, even for sins. And before the crew chief took the manifest, I tore a page out of the green memo book in my chest pocket, the same kind of book I am carrying in this story 8 years later, and I wrote 5 words on it and stapled it to the corner of the manifest. I did it because I wanted whoever flew into that dark to know it had stopped being a parts run. 5 words. Bring them home. All of them. The bird lifted at 0341. The flight, out and back with the loading, took 47 minutes that I experienced as a geological era. I sat at that desk and did not move and did not pray exactly, because I am not built for it. But I kept the radio volume 1 notch too loud and I memorized the sound of static. At 0428, the call came back. 4 souls aboard, all breathing. I went to the latrine and threw up, quietly and efficiently. And then I came back and finished my shift, because the 0530 parts run still needed rescheduling. And that too is logistics. The inquiry opened on a Tuesday. I gave my statement on a Wednesday in a plywood office to a colonel who listened with his hands folded, looked at me for a long moment when I finished, and said 2 sentences I wrote down verbatim afterward. Off the record, Sergeant. Good. On the record, don't. The inquiry closed on Friday. Nobody wants the headline about the sergeant who got hung for saving 4 Marines. And more to the point, all 4 lived. And the Army has a long tradition of not autopsying outcomes it likes. Two details from that week turned out to matter more than the inquiry did. The first is that my battalion commander, during the Wednesday meeting, set his coffee mug down directly on the manifest copy in my file, and the ring soaked through and ate half my signature. First initial survived. Most of the last name survived. The rest became a brown ghost. The Army cannot even ruin things consistently. The original manifest went wherever originals go, into a records consolidation, which is a building where paper goes to be technically alive, and the only copy that ever traveled anywhere had that coffee ring on it. Remember the ring. Everything in this story is paperwork eventually. The second is the note. I assumed it died stapled to the manifest. 5 words on green graph-ruled memo paper, gone into the same archive dark as everything else. I never asked. You don't ask after the things you did with your eyes closed. I never put in for anything. There was nothing to put in for. You do not get commendations for crimes with good outcomes. I never told my husband, back when I had one. He asked once why I was quiet at dinner that week, and I said inventory, and he nodded, because inventory was a thing he had decided my life was made of. I filed the whole night in the part of my brain where you keep things that are over. It was not over. It was 47 minutes old, and it had just started walking toward me, and it was going to take 8 years to arrive. Back to Bridgeport. Day 5, the weather brief got serious. A front was coming down out of the Gulf of Alaska with gusts forecast to 45 knots on the ridgelines, and the cadre made a call. The Capstone Ridge movement would jump a day to beat the worst of it. The camp's whole metabolism changed that evening. Gear got staged. The young ones got loud the way you get loud when you're nervous and 23. I re-wrapped my knee twice and pretended both wraps were the first one. I couldn't sleep that night. Knee, nerves, and the particular insomnia of a person who has done the math on a 3.1-mile movement at altitude with a rebuilt joint and come up with an answer she doesn't like. Around 2300, I gave up and walked to the burn barrel outside the instructor area, because fire is fire, and he was there. Of course he was there. I had started to suspect the man didn't sleep so much as stand watch over his own life. We talked for a while about nothing. Equipment, the forecast, whether the Chow Hall's chili could be classified as a war crime or merely a violation. He laughed once, short and rusty, like a hinge that hadn't been used in a while, and I caught myself collecting that too. Then I noticed the ring line. Pale band of skin, left hand, third finger, the ghost of a wedding ring worn for years and gone. I didn't ask. I have a divorce of my own. I know the warning signs of a question. He caught me noticing anyway. 6 years, he said, to the question I hadn't asked. Car accident, stateside. I was on a ship in the Pacific. The message took 4 days to find me. I said the only true thing there is to say, which is nothing, with my face. He nodded at the fire, and then he said something I wrote down later in the green book, word for word, because it was the most honest sentence anyone had said to me in years. You spend your whole career learning to get people home, and then you find out the word home was the part you didn't understand. We stood there a while. The fire spat. Somewhere downhill, a generator hiccuped and caught again. Then he did the too casual thing. I know the too casual thing. I have deployed with intelligent soldiers. He turned his cup a quarter turn and asked conversationally whether I'd ever stood a night desk overseas. 2014, 2015, somewhere in there. Everybody stands night desks, I said. He nodded like that settled it and let it go. And as he said goodnight, his free hand came up and touched his chest pocket. 2 fingers, flat, half a second, the way you check a pulse, the way you check that something is still there. I clocked it the way you clock things at 41, silently, and filed under later. The Ridge Day started at 04:30 with my knee wrapping ritual and ended with me being carried. So let me take you through the middle honestly, because the middle is where I stopped being a roster number to those kids, and where this story stops being mine alone. Step off was Iro 5:30. Headlamps in the dark, 19 trainees and 4 cadre. Bull rucks. The route climbed through timber for the first hour, switchbacked above the tree line as the sky went from black to a hard aluminum gray, and then put us on the traverse, a long, exposed pitch of wind-scoured ice with fixed lines the cadre had set where you clip in, keep 3 points of contact, and have your private conversation with gravity. The wind on that traverse was a physical opinion. It came across the ridge in gusts that staggered the big kids and made the lieutenant's commands into confetti. My knee was holding. I want that on the record. 6 days of tombstone odds, and the knee was holding, and somewhere in my chest a small, stupid, hopeful animal had started doing arithmetic about finishing this course. Then the anchor failed. I was mid-span between 2 pickets when I heard it, except heard is wrong. I felt it through the line, a sound like a knuckle cracking deep inside the mountain, and then the rope that had been geometry became loose string. The picket above me had sheared out of the ice, clean, and my 3 points of contact became 0 in about the time it takes to read this clause. I went down on my left side and started to slide. I need you to understand what a fall like that actually is, because movies have lied to you. It is not a tumble. It is acceleration with paperwork. My rucksack swung and dragged me sideways. Loose snow came up into my face like static. My left knee caught a ripple of ice, twisted under the full moving weight of me and the ruck, and made a sound I heard above the wind, a deep, wet pop that arrived in my stomach before it arrived as pain. The rope caught for half a second on the next anchor down, jerked me around like a dog hitting the end of a chain, and let go again. I had one clear thought on the way down, and I am not proud of it. 19 years of service, I thought, and the last sound I hear is going to be a 23-year-old saying called it. I got my forearms under me and tried to self-arrest, elbows and toes, the way you're taught, and I was losing. The slope rolled away below into a gray nothing that the wind kept erasing, and from above me, in that whole strung-out line of healthy young bodies, for one long, ugly second, nothing moved. I could see them when the snow gusts opened, headlamps in a row, faces turned down at me, every single one of them waiting for the situation to be someone else's job. The lieutenant was yelling something with the word hold in it, which was advice on par with telling a kettle to calm down. Then a voice came down the slope, and the voice was not yelling. Look at me, not the drop. Me. He was already moving. I learned afterward that he had been at the top of the traverse and had covered the distance to the lower anchor in the time it took everyone else to inhale. He came down the pitch with an economy that made it look like the mountain was cooperating, clipped into the holding anchor, planted himself, and got a fist around my rucksack's haul strap just as the slope steepened. Don't fight the angle, he said. You'll roll. Edge in. Good. Again. The pain in my knee was a white noise that I could not hear around, and I am told I answered him with something profane and grammatically ambitious. He took it the way he took weather. When I was stable against his anchor, he ran 2 fingers down the rope, looked at the sheared picket placement above us for exactly 1 second, and I watched something cross his face that was not beer. It was arithmetic. Then he put it away because there was a more urgent number in front of him, which was me. Can you stand? I tried. The knee answered for me. The leg folded like bad furniture, and he caught me before the slope could take the question back. And there I was, 41 years old, held upright on a mountainside by a man I'd known 6 days, in front of 19 children who had bet actual money on my failure. Somewhere above, the wind brought down a piece of a sentence. A young voice. The words slow everybody down, arriving with the snow. He didn't react. Not a flicker. Somehow that was worse and better at the same time. Weather's coming, he said, to me, only to me. No sled extraction in this visibility. We're moving before the front does. You are not carrying me down this mountain? Correct, he said, already turning, already crouching. I'm carrying you down 1.8 miles of it. The mountain stays. There is a particular humiliation in being loaded onto another human being's back at my age, in front of an audience, and I want to be honest about it instead of skipping to the part where it becomes romantic. Because it did not feel romantic. It felt like every fear I had carried up that mountain had been issued a megaphone. And then he stood up with me like I was a normal object, settled the weight once, and started walking. And the humiliation had to share the room with something else, which was the steadiness of him. He walked like a metronome. Wind that staggered the kids ahead of us hit him and got absorbed somewhere between his boots and his breathing. Put me down, I said, around minute 10. No, I outweigh your ruck. My ruck complains less. A laugh came out of me, short and involuntary, whipped away by the wind. Behind us, the file of trainees had gone completely silent, and it was not the silence of judgment anymore. Even at 23, you know history when you watch it carry somebody. I spent a stretch of that descent studying the side of his face because it was either that or the drop. Windburn, the gray at the temple. A jaw set not in effort, but in something more like patience. Like the mountain was a long meeting he had decided to outlast. At one point, a gust came through hard enough to stagger even him. 1/2 step, and I felt his grip change, not tighter on himself, tighter on me, and I thought, with the strange clarity you get at altitude and adrenaline, this man has carried things before. This is not the first time. This is a skill that got built somewhere, and it cost something. We came off the exposed section at 1340 by my watch. I know because I logged it later in the green book with a hand that wasn't steady. 1340, lower staging, alive. The medics took me at the staging area, and the whole choreography of casualty handling swallowed us, and I never got to say anything to him that wasn't shouted around a blood pressure cuff. The last I saw of him for several hours, he was standing at the edge of the staging area in the rising wind, looking back up at the traverse with that arithmetic face, and his hand came up, 2 fingers flat, and touched his chest pocket. The medical verdict came in around 1500. Grade 2 sprain of the medial collateral ligament on a knee that had already used up its sympathy. No surgery. Brace, ice, profile, and the medic's exact words, which I appreciated for their honesty. You'll finish this course ugly, but you'll finish. The storm arrived on schedule that evening, and the camp battened down into that particular hum of a military installation in bad weather. Generators and guy lines and canvas snapping like applause from a hostile crowd. And the social weather changed too, faster than the real kind. Nobody made a retirement joke at evening chow. A specialist I had never exchanged a full sentence with carried my tray without asking and without making it a production. And when I limped past the instructor shack on the way back, I saw through the doorway that the whiteboard had been wiped clean. The pool, the odds, the little tombstone, gone. Nobody ever admitted to it. I ended up in the warming tent after dark because the medic wanted my knee elevated near a heat source, and the major ended up there because, I assumed then, it was his camp and his stove. The storm made the canvas walls breathe. The stove ticked. He handed me a metal cup. Real coffee, real cream. The standing task executed even now, and lowered himself onto the crate across from me with the careful negotiation of a man whose own joints have opinions. We sat for a while inside the storm noise. I was floating a little, ibuprofen and adrenaline debt, and the strange lightness that follows the worst not happening. We talked about the anchor, briefly, about the knee. He asked how the pain was, and I said it was being managed by sarcasm and vitamin Y, and he said carry on, and the stove ticked, and the wind put its shoulder against the tent. And because I was loopy, and because I had spent 6 days collecting his almost smiles like a magpie, and because there are moments when the truth dresses up as a joke so it can get past security, I looked at this gray, steady, ring-ghosted man who had walked me off a mountain like a verdict, and I said it. Whoever marries you is going to be a lucky woman. The wind filled the pause. He looked at me for a long moment, long enough that I felt the joke begin to die on the table between us, and then he leaned forward, forearms on his knees, closer, and said quietly, with no smile anywhere on him, I was hoping it'd be you, so here we are. The hook of the story, the line I told my friend on the phone, the line that sounds like a man shooting his shot in a tent, and I responded the way 41-year-old divorced women respond to incoming fire of that caliber. I laughed. I deflected. I said, "Sure, Major, buy me a coffee first," and held up the cup he had literally just bought me, which at least made it a good joke. He didn't laugh. That was the first wrong note, because by then I knew his face, and his face did banter. Instead, he sat back and looked at me the way he had looked at the sheared picket, like a man checking arithmetic he'd already done 100 times, and then he reached 2 fingers into his chest pocket. I want to slow down here, because this is the part of the night I have replayed the most. He came out with his wallet, old leather gone soft and concave from years of sitting on it, and from a slot inside it, with a care that did not match the object, he drew a small folded piece of paper, trifold, soft at the creases the way paper gets when it has been opened 1,000 times and refolded carefully every single time, edges gone fuzzy as felt, one fold line reinforced with a strip of clear tape that had itself gone amber with age. He held it out to me like it was made of glass, and I knew the paper before I knew anything else. That is the detail I cannot explain to people who don't live in their pockets. Green-tinted, graph-ruled, the specific cheap government stock of a standard-issue memo book, the same kind that was rubber-banded in my own chest pocket at that exact moment. 8 years and 7,000 miles from the night I had torn a page out of its ancestor. My hands knew before I did. They went cold around the coffee. I unfolded it. 3 creases, soft as cloth. The staple holes were still in the corner. 2 little rusted eyelets. 5 words. My handwriting. The impatient capital B I have written the same way since the 9th grade. The letters that give up slightly at the end of words because my hand has always moved faster than my patience. Bring them home. All of them. The storm kept making the walls breathe. I looked at the paper and looked at him, and the question came out at about half its intended volume. Where did you get this? And he told me. He told me in the same level voice he had used on the Traverse, and I am going to give it to you the way it landed, which is in pieces. The note didn't die in an archive. The crew chief on that bird had unstapled it from the manifest somewhere over the dark and at the field hospital. While the surgical team took the worst of the 4, the crew chief had pressed the page into the hands of the youngest casualty, 19 years old, awake and gray on a litter, and said, "Somebody meant this." The kid kept it. Through the surgeries, through the medical flights, through Germany and stateside, and the long, boring violence of rehabilitation, that page lived in a plastic sleeve, and the kid showed it to everyone. Nurses, family, the chaplain, like a citation no one had thought to frame. And 8 years ago, the kid put it in an envelope and gave it to a man he trusted more than anyone breathing, and gave him a mission to go with it. "You're the one with the clearances and the patience," the kid said. "Find the sergeant, give it back." The man took the mission. Of course he took the mission. Taking missions was the entire architecture of his life. It should have been simple, and it was impossible, and the reason it was impossible is a coffee ring. The note itself was unsigned, 5 words from nobody. The only name anywhere in the paper trail was a signature on a photocopied manifest, and the photocopy had been made after a colonel's mug had eaten half of it. First initial, most of a last name, a brown ghost where accountability used to be. So he searched with what he had, which was a first initial, a partial surname, and the kind of patience that gets mistaken for stubbornness by people who have never needed it. He asked at every logistics office on every base he touched for 8 years. Casual questions over coffee. You ever hear about a night in 2014? He cold-called retired warrant officers. 4 years in, he found the pilot, gravel-voiced and gray, who remembered the night perfectly and the name not at all, except he said that the sergeant on the line had spelled it like a dare. Twice he thought he had her. A retired sergeant first class in Tucson. Right initial, wrong years, and he sat in her kitchen for 40 minutes being gently told no. A logistics contractor outside Fort Campbell. Right surname shape, wrong branch, wrong war. Both times he apologized for taking up their afternoon, drove to wherever he was staying, and refolded the note along its soft creases, and kept going. 3 weeks ago, a winter course staffing roster crossed his desk, and on it, a name, right first initial, right surname, Army, logistics, and a service record whose dates fit around 2014 like a key fits a lock. He requested the instructor slot within the hour. He told no one why. He had been wrong twice. He was not going to make it a ceremony. Then check-in day, the folding table, the billeting roster. He watched me sign my name, and he said the bottom dropped out of 8 years all at once. Same impatient capital, same letters giving up at the end. He had looked at a photocopy of that signature so many times that watching me produce it live was, his words, like watching a ghost sit down and order lunch. He'd said nothing for 6 days because he had been wrong twice, and because you do not hand a person a thing like this on day 1, and he was still working out the when. And then this morning, before step-off, I had signed the equipment log 18 inches from his hand. Full name, no coffee ring, and the mountain had gone ahead and decided the schedule for him. I sat there in the warming tent holding 8 years of his life in my cold hands, and I asked the only question left, and it came out smaller than I wanted. Why? Why this? People did harder things over there every week of the war, and nobody drives to Tucson about it. Why did you spend 8 years on 5 words? He went quiet for long enough that I thought I had finally overstepped, that there was a floor to this man, and I had found it. The stove ticked. The storm leaned on the tent, and the tent leaned back. Then he reached over, took the note from my hands with the same care he'd taken it from the wallet, laid it on his knee, and smoothed it flat with 2 fingers. The exact gesture I had watched him make against his chest pocket for 6 days without understanding what I was looking at. When he spoke, his voice was level the way a hell breath is level. "The 19-year-old, he said. The one the crew chief gave the note to. The one with the tourniquet. One of those 4 Marines was his little little brother. I did not say anything. There is no regulation for that moment, and I have looked. His little brother. 19 years old that night, a machine gunner 11 months into his first enlistment. The urgent surgical on my radio. The arterial bleed below the knee. The tourniquet that went on at 02:49 and started a clock that every person on that watch floor could hear ticking from 7 kilometers away. The surgeons in the rotation later put the margin at under an hour, he told me. The flight I retasked covered the distance, out and back, in 47 minutes. He's 31 now. He kept a leg. He lost most of the hearing in his left ear and gained, his brother's words, an unbearable sense of humor about it. He calls every Sunday at 1900 whether or not there is anything to say, because for one night in 2014 there was a real possibility of no more Sundays, and the family decided, without ever voting on it, that the calls would simply never stop. And that morning, the major said, while I was wrapping my knee in the dark at 6800 feet, his little brother had walked his daughter to her first day of kindergarten, held her backpack off the ground the whole way so it wouldn't drag, sent his big brother a picture of her at the classroom door. Their mother sets an extra place at Thanksgiving. She has done it every year since 2014. A plate, a chair, silverware nobody touches, set for someone the family only ever calls the sergeant, which over 8 years had stopped being a rank and become a name. The note had hung framed in her hallway for a few months before the kid asked for it back and handed it to his brother with a mission. Find the sergeant. Give it back. So when I said it in that tent, he told me, whoever marries you is going to be a lucky woman. And I looked up, and the person on the other side of the stove was the sergeant. I wasn't hoping the way it sounded. I'd been hoping for 3 weeks that the name on a roster was the name on a manifest. I'd been hoping for 8 years that the person behind 5 words was real. I said exactly what I meant. I was hoping it'd be you. Then he picked the note up off his knee and held it out to me again. Formally this time, 2 hands, the way you return a flag. The mission, he said, was to give it back. And I surprised both of us because I didn't take it. I reached out and closed his hands around it. Around 8 years of soft creases and amber tape and rusted staple holes, and I heard myself say the truest piece of logistics I have ever spoken. It was never mine. I shipped it. It was always going home with him. He looked at the note and looked at me, and something in his shoulders came down half an inch, like a man setting down a ruck at the end of a long movement. Then he stood, held up one finger, and stepped out into the storm, and through the canvas I heard the wind take its shot at him and lose. When he came back in, there was a phone in his hand, already connected, already counting seconds on the screen, and he was not quite steady around the mouth for the first time in 6 days. He said into the phone, "It's me. I know it's not Sunday. Sunday came early this year." A pause. I found her. He held the phone out to me. I took it with both hands because one was not going to be enough, and I put it to my ear, and I listened to a 31-year-old machine gunner on the other side of the country breathe like a man who had just been hit by weather of his own. When his voice came, it came careful, the way you walk on a rebuilt leg. He said, "Ma'am, I've had your note memorized since I was 19. You wrote, 'Bring them home,' all of them." The line crackled. Somewhere behind him, faint, a little girl's voice asked who he was talking to, and I heard him swallow. "All of us came home, Sergeant," he said. "All of us. Every single one." I sat in a canvas tent at 6,800 feet in a dying storm, holding a stranger's phone with both hands, across the stove from a man who had carried me 8 miles down a mountain and carried my 5 words for 8 years, and for the first time since 0314, on a Tuesday in 2014, I let the radio silence end. He bought me the coffee, for the record. 0630. The next morning, real cream, both hands around the cup, and the betting pool whiteboard stayed blank for the rest of the course. He also asked the admin shop for the billeting roster page when the course closed out, the one from check-in day. Apparently he knows somebody who collects my signature.